Phaedo by Plato, Part 3 of 5, translated by Sanderson Beck. But if I think the soul departs polluted and impure from the body, because it always associated with the body, and cared for this, and loved it, and was fascinated by it, and its desires and pleasures, so that nothing else seemed to be true except bodily things, which one can touch and see, and drink and eat and use for sexual love. But what is dark and invisible to the sight, and intelligible and chosen by philosophy, and being accustomed to hate this and tremble and avoid it, do you think that a soul in this condition will depart it of itself unmixed? Not in the least, he said. But also is it interpenetrated, I think, by bodily things, which intercourse and association with its body, through always associating and much practice, makes inborn. Certainly. And my friend, one should think this is weighty, and heavy, and earthy, and visible. And having this, such a soul is weighed down and dragged again into the visible realm, by fear of the invisible in the Hades, as it is said, roaming about monuments and graveyards, about which also shadowy forms of souls have been seen, phantoms, which cause such souls to be visible, which are not released purely, but take part in the visible, and therefore are seen. It is probable, Socrates. Yet, Cebes, it is probable also that these are not the souls of the good, but of the inferior, which are compelled to wander about such places to pay justice for former evil ways of being. And they wander even as far as this, until being followed closely by the bodily form, by desire they are bound into the body. And they are bound, as is probable, into such a character as they happen to have been interested in during life. What characters do you mean, Socrates? Those such as gluttons and the insolent, and those interested in drinking and not being wary, they are likely to be bound into a breed of asses and such beasts, don't you think? What you say certainly is probable. And those who have chosen injustice and tyranny and robbery go into a breed of wolves and hawks and kites, or where else would we say such go? Doubtless, said Cebes, into such. Then is it clear also about the others where each should go, according to what is most similar to their practice? It is clear, he said, of course. Then are the happiest, he said, of these, and those going to the best place, those who have pursued democratic and political virtue, which they call prudence and justice, out of habit and practice, without philosophy and mind. How are these the happiest? Because these will probably arrive again into such a political and gentle breed, either bees or wasps or ants, or again into the same human race, and from them will be born moderate men. Probably. And when departing, it is not right for anyone who is not loving wisdom and wholly pure to reach the family of the gods, but for the one who loves learning. But on account of this, dear Simeus and Cebes, those loving wisdom correctly keep away from all bodily desires, and are patient and do not give themselves over to them, not from fear of household ruin and poverty, like the many who love money, nor is it because of anxiety about dishonor and the disgrace of hardship, like the lovers of power and honor, that they keep away from them. For that would not be fitting, Socrates, said Cebes. Of course not, by Zeus, he said. Accordingly, Cebes, those who care at all for their own souls, but do not live working for the body, saying goodbye to that, are not driven down by those who do not know where they are going, and themselves believing they must not oppose the practice of philosophy and her release and purification, they turn following her wherever she leads. How, Socrates? I'll tell you, he said. For the lovers of learning know that until philosophy actually receives their soul, it is fastened and glued in the body, being compelled to look at realities as though through this prison, but not through her own self, and wallowing in complete ignorance, and she looks down at the terribleness of the imprisonment that it is through desire, which bound itself is the main accomplice of the binding. So, as I say, the lovers of learning know that in this way philosophy receives their soul and tries to gently encourage and release her, indicating that filled with deceit is viewing through the body, and deceitful the ears and the other senses, and persuading her to withdraw from them, except so far as it is necessary to use them, and advising her to collect and gather into herself, and trusting nothing else but herself by herself, except her very own intelligence of reality itself. And whatever else is viewed in other ways is something else, not to be believed as true, it being so sensory and visible. But she sees the intelligible and intangible. So, not thinking it is necessary to oppose her release, the soul of the true philosopher thus keeps away from pleasures and desires and griefs and fears so far as possible, reasoning that whenever one has excessive pleasure or fear or grief or desire, he suffers such evil from them as one might think, such as either sickness or some expenses through the desires. But the evil, which is the greatest of all and most extreme, this he experiences and does not consider it. What is this, Socrates? Said Cebes. That which the soul of every person is compelled at the time of excessive pleasure or pain also to believe, that what is especially felt is what is most distinct and most true. It simply does not hold. These are mostly the visible ones, are they not? Certainly. Thus, in this which is most felt, is not the soul most bound by the body? How so? Because each pleasure and pain, like a nail, nails and fastens itself to the body and makes it corporeal, believing these things to be true, which the body also says are. For from agreeing with the body and delighting in the same things, she is compelled to adopt the same habits and the same upbringing, and never arrives purely into Hades, but always goes out infected by the body, so that quickly again she falls into another body, and like scattered seed is sown, and from this has no share in the divine and pure, and communion in the one form. What you say is most true, Socrates, said Cebes. Therefore, on account of this, Cebes, the true lovers of learning are well ordered and courageous, not on account of what the many say, or do you think so? Of course not. No, for the courageous soul of the philosopher will reason another way, and would not think it useful for philosophy to release her. And released, she would be bound herself fast again in pleasures and pains, and would decline to do any of Penelope's work by reversing the handling of the loom. But she will prepare for calmness from these, following reasoning and always being in this, gazing at the truth and the divine and the undoubted, and supported by that, she thinks it is necessary to live thus while she lives, and when she dies, to depart into what is akin and such, rid of human evils. And out of such nurturing, no one need be afraid, Simmias and Cebes, that she will be torn apart in the departure from the body, be dispersed by the winds, and scared of being gone and of no longer being anywhere. Then a silence occurred for a long time after these things were said by Socrates, and himself on the meaning spoken, Socrates appeared to contemplate, as did most of us. But Simmias and Cebes conversed with each other a little, and Socrates, seeing, took it up. Why, he asked, does it seem to you that what was said is insufficient argument? For it still has many suspicions and loose ends, if anyone cares to discuss it thoroughly. So, if you are considering something else, I say nothing. But if anyone is in doubt about these things, do not hesitate to say them and to go through them, if it appears to you it somehow could have been better said. And take me along also, if you think you can find a better way with me. And Simmias said, And really, Socrates, I'll tell you the truth. For a while, each of us in doubt has been pushing and urging the other to ask because of the desire to hear, but hesitate to cause unpleasant annoyance for you because of the unfortunate circumstance. And having heard, he laughed softly and said, Oh, my Simmias, what difficulty I shall have persuading other people that I do not regard my present circumstances unfortunate, when I am not even able to persuade you. But you are afraid now I am apt to be more irritable than in my life before, and probably I seem to you to be worse in prophecy than the swans, who when they perceive that they must die, also having sung in the previous time, then they sing most and best, rejoicing that they are about to go away to the God whose ministers they are. But people, because of their own fear of death, misrepresent also the swans, and say they sing out lamenting death under grief, and do not reason that no bird sings when hungry or cold or suffering any other grief, not even the nightingale and swallow and the hoopoe, which they say sings because of lamenting grief. But these do not appear to me to sing grieving, nor do the swans. But I think they are Apollos, and they are foreseeing the good things in Hades. They sing and celebrate on that day more than at any previous time. And I believe myself also to be a fellow slave of the swans, and sacred to the same God, and to have prophecy no worse than theirs from the Master, and to be departing from life no more despondent than they. However, one ought to speak on account of this and ask whatever you wish, as long as the 11 Athenians permit. Beautifully you speak, said Simmias, and I'll tell you what I doubt, and then he which of the things said are not accepted. For it seems to me, Socrates, concerning these things, perhaps as it also does to you, that to know clearly now in life is either impossible or most difficult. Yet not to discuss in every way the arguments about them and to desist before exhausting every consideration certainly would be remiss. For about this it is necessary to accomplish one of two things, either to learn which has it or to discover it, or, if that is impossible, at least taking the best of the human arguments and hardest to refute, and on this riding as on a boat venturing to sail through life, unless one can pass through safer and with less danger on a more secure ship by some divine word. And so, even now, I am not ashamed to ask, since you also say these things, I will not blame myself at a later time, that now I did not speak what it seems to me. For to me, Socrates, when both by myself and with him I considered the things said, the inquiry certainly does not appear sufficient. And Socrates said, Perhaps, dear friend, what appears to you is true. But say then, how it is not sufficient. In this to me, he said, which also about a harmony and a lyre and its strings, one might say the same argument, that the harmony is invisible and incorporeal, and most beautiful and divine in the tuned lyre. But the lyre itself and the strings are corporeal and physical and compounded and earthy, and it is related to the mortal. Therefore, when someone shatters the lyre or cuts and breaks the strings, if someone should maintain by the same argument as you, that by necessity that harmony still exists and does not perish, for there would be no device by which the lyre would still exist with broken strings, and the strings being mortal, and the harmony perish, which is of the same nature, and related to the divine and immortal, before the mortal perished. But necessity says the harmony itself still exists somewhere, and the wood and the strings must rot before that could suffer anything. And therefore, Socrates, I think this also must have occurred to you, that we assume the soul is something like this, as though our body were strung and held together by heat and cold and moisture and dryness and so on. And our soul is a combination and a harmony of these things, when they are beautifully and properly combined with each other. Thus, if it happens the soul is a harmony, it is clear that when our body is excessively slack or stretched by sickness and other evils, the soul at once starts to perish, even though it is divine, just like other harmonies and sounds and in all works of the artist. And the remains of each body endure a long time until either burnt or decayed. So see what we shall say to this argument. If someone claims the soul, being a combination in the body, is the first to perish in what is called death. Then Socrates looked straight, as many times he used to do, and smiled. Yet what you say is right, Simmias, he said. So, if any of you is more ready than I, why not answer? For it seems the argument touches not a trivial point. Yet it seems to me to be useful, before answering, first to hear Cebes, what he challenges in the argument, so that gaining time we shall be advised what we shall say, and then, having heard, either agree with them, if they seem to ring true, but if not, then plead the argument already presented. But come on, Cebes, he said, tell us what it was that bothered you. I will tell you, said Cebes, for it appears to me the argument is still the same, and as we argued before, it has the same fault. For that our soul existed before coming into this form, I do not deny it, was no doubt neatly, and if I may say so, quite sufficiently demonstrated. But also, when we are dead, that it still exists somewhere does not seem to me so. That the soul is not stronger and longer lasting than the body, I do not agree with Simmias' objection, for it seems to me in every way it surpasses it very much. What then, the argument might say, do you still disbelieve, when you see a person dying, that the weaker still exists? And does it not seem necessary to you the longer lasting still is preserved during the same time? So consider this, whether I am saying anything, for it seems I need some simile, just as Simmias did. For to me it seems similar to be saying these things, as though someone would say about an old weaver who died this argument, that the person did not perish but exists somewhere safe, and would offer as evidence the coat which the same weaver had woven, that it exists safe and did not perish. And if anyone disbelieves this, one would ask which is longer lasting, the life of the person or a coat in use and being worn. And someone answering that the person is much longer, one would think it accepted that above all the person is safe, since the shorter lasting did not perish. But I think, Simmias, it is not so. For consider also what I tell you. For everyone understands that whoever says this is talking folly. For this weaver who wore out many such coats, and having woven those, perished after many of them. But before the last, I think, and no person on this account is poorer nor weaker than a coat. I think the same simile would apply for soul to body. For someone saying the same things about them would appear to be speaking properly, that the soul is longer lasting, and the body is weaker and shorter lasting. But one might say each of the souls wears out many bodies, especially if one lives for many years. For if the body should melt away and corrupt while the person is still living, and the soul is always weaving anew what is wearing down, then it would be necessary when the soul should perish, for it by chance to have on this last one woven, and to perish before this one alone. And the soul, having perished, then directly the body would show its natural weakness, and quickly would be gone to waste. So by this argument it is not yet worthy of being confidently believed, that when we die our soul still exists somewhere. For if one were to concede even more to one arguing what you argue, granting him not only our soul's existence at a time before we were born, but there would be nothing to prevent also when we die the possibility of it still existing and being born and dying again many times. For it is so strong by nature that the soul holds out being born many times. And granting this, one might not concede that it does not suffer in its being born and dying many times, and does not perish completely in one of its deaths. And this death and this dissolution of the body, which brings ruin to the soul, one would say no one knows, for it is impossible for any of us to perceive it. And if this is so, anyone who faces death confidently is thoughtlessly confident, unless one can show that the soul is completely immortal and imperishable, and if not, it is necessary always for the one who is about to die to be afraid for one's soul, that in now being separated from the body, one may completely perish. So having heard what they said, all of us were unpleasantly disposed, as we later said to each other, because having been convinced by the previous argument, it seemed to disturb us again and brought us down into disbelief, not only for the past discussion, but also the latter for what was about to be said, none of us being capable of judging and being distrustful of these matters. By the gods, Phaedo, I have sympathy for you. For now, having heard what you had to say, it occurred to me, then what argument shall we still believe? Since, being quite convincing, the argument which Socrates said now has fallen into distrust. For wonderfully this argument has taken hold of me, both now and always, that our soul is some kind of a harmony, and you mentioning it has reminded me that I myself held this before. And now I need again, as from the very beginning, some other argument, which will convince me that at death the soul does not also die. So say, before God, how Socrates went after the argument, and whether he also, as you say you were, was manifesting any annoyance or not. Or did he calmly assist the argument? And did he assist adequately or deficiently? Tell us everything as accurately as you can. Socrates, often having marveled at Socrates, never have I admired him more than on that occasion. So his having an argument was perhaps not unexpected. But I was especially amazed, first at how pleasantly and gently and respectfully he accepted the argument of the youths, then how he perceived how sharply we were convinced by the arguments, then how well he healed us, and as though he called us up from flight and defeat and turned us forward toward it, he persuaded us also to consider together the argument. Really? How? I'll tell you. For I happened to be sitting on his right, beside the bed on a low stool, and he was much higher than I. So stroking my head and grasping the hair on the neck, for whenever it occurred he was in the habit of playing with my hair, so perhaps tomorrow, Phaedo, he said, this beautiful long hair will be cut off. It's likely, Socrates, I said. Not if you are convinced by me. But why? I asked. Today, he said, both you and I will do this, if our argument dies and we are not able to revive it. And if I were you and the argument escaped me, I would take an oath like the Argives, not to let it grow long until I had conquered in a renewed fight, the argument of Simmias and Cebes. But, I said, against two it is said not even Heracles is able. But then, he said, call me Iolaus, while it is still light. I'll call, rather, I said, not on Heracles, but as Iolaus. It makes no difference, he said. But first let us be careful we do not suffer a certain emotion. Of what kind? I asked. Let us not become, he said, logic haters, like those who become misanthropes, since there is not, he said, any evil worse than this emotion of hating logic. And logic hating and misanthropy come out of the same manner. For misanthropy is clothed out of trusting someone excessively without skill and believing a person to be completely true and sound and trustworthy, then a little later finding him bad and untrustworthy, and again with another. And when someone experiences this many times, and especially by those who one believes are nearest and dearest, so often taking offense, he ends up hating everyone and believes absolutely no one is sound at all. Have you not observed this occurring? Certainly, I said. Then, he said, is it not shameful and clear that such a person is without skill in human things, in attempting to deal with humans? For if one dealt with skill as though one has it, then one would believe the good and bad are each very few, and those in between most. What do you mean? I said. He said, just as concerning the very small and large, do you think there is anything more rare than to find a very large or a very small person, or dog, or anything else? Or quick, or slow, or foul, or beautiful, or white, or black? Have you not observed that at the ultimate extent all such things are rare and few, and in between abundant and many? Certainly, I said. Then do you think, he said, if a contest in evil were arranged, certainly few also in this would appear first? It is likely, I said. For it is likely, he said. But in this arguments are not similar to people, but even now by your lead was I saying it, rather in that, When someone in believing the truth of an argument, being without skill in arguments, and when a little later is sometimes of the opinion it is false, but sometimes it is not, and again another and another, and then the very ones spending time arguing about disputations think that finally they are the wisest and alone have discovered that none of the matters argued are either sound or sure, but all things being just like the twisting of the Euripus up and down, and nothing stays for any time at all. Certainly, I said, you tell the truth. Then Phaedo, he said, it would be a pitiful experience if there is some true and sure argument, and it can be understood when, because of coming across such arguments, which at one time seem to be true and another not, one should not blame oneself for one's lack of skill, but finally, because of the hassling, gladly shift the blame from oneself to the arguments, and then for the rest of life go on hating and reviling them, being deprived of the truth and knowledge of reality. Yes, by Zeus, I said, very pitiful. First then, he said, let us beware of this, and not admit in the soul that there is the danger of arguments not being sound at all, but rather that we are not yet sound, and we must be courageous and willing to be sound. Thus for you and the others, and on account of all your future life, and for me on account of this death, since I am in danger in the present of not being philosophical about this, but just like the uncultured am contentious. For when those disagree, they do not consider which argument is so, but how to present their own, so that they seem so to the listeners. They are eager for this. And it seems to me I differ in the present only in this, for I will not be so eager that what I say to those present should seem to be true, except as a byproduct, but that it should especially seem so to me. For I reason, dear friend, see how selfishly, if what I say happens to be true, then believing it is beautiful. But if dying is nothing, then in this time before death I shall not yield at present to unpleasant mourning. And this ignorance of mine will not last, for that would be evil, but a little later it would be left behind. Prepared then, Simmias and Cebes, he said, thus I come to the argument. Yet you, if you are persuaded by me, will consider Socrates little and truth much more. If to you I seem to say the truth, agree, but if not, oppose every argument, that I may not from eagerness deceive at the same time both myself and you, and like a bee, leaving the sting behind, depart.